Hello, and welcome to our second Continuing the Conversation studio chat of the 2014-2015 season. Thanks for joining. Continuing the Conversation, or CTC, is an arts and education network founded and organized by alumni of the Arts and Education program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Our goal is to provide spaces for conversations that are important to advancing the work in the arts and education sector, and to get as many people as we can across sectors engaged in those conversations. You can join the conversation today by commenting on our website or by tweeting with the hashtag AIECTCchat. I'm Eliza Greenberg, a co-chair of CTC and an alumna of the AIE program, and I'm excited to welcome our guest today to discuss what hip-hop artists can teach arts educators and the relationship between learning in formal and informal settings. We're joined in the studio by James Miles and Jamel Mims from the Fresh Prep program at Urban Arts Partnership in New York City, and by Mara Perch, who's a 2012 alumna and a doctoral candidate at Columbia University, and a consultant to the Hip Hop Archive at Harvard University. We're also joined by Aisha Upchurch, who is a student in the Arts and Education program at Harvard, and by Steve Seidel, who's the program director. You can find more information about our guests on the website, and Steve, I'm going to hand it off to you to get the conversation started.
Hey, thank you, Eliza. I've felt for a long time that one of the conversations in arts education that's not very good is the conversation between folks who do their practice and their teaching and learning of whatever art form it is in real time, not in formal learning environments. In fact, I feel like maybe like most of the really powerful learning that we do, or a huge part of the really powerful learning that we do, and particularly that young people do in the arts, is in informal settings where they're teaching each other, or someone just drops in and who's got more experience and pushes them and their practice in some way, whether it's in the visual arts, the performing arts, whatever the art form. Those are really, really powerful learning environments. And I felt for quite a while that maybe there are a lot of good lessons from the way in which that informal learning takes place for people who work in formal settings, like the work that I've done for much of my career. So we have, I've also felt like a really powerful environment to examine for these kinds of lessons of amazing teaching in informal settings is our hip-hop communities. And we've got a fantastic group of people assembled here today for this chat. So I'm going to hand it over to them to sort of take on the question, what hip-hop artists can teach arts educators who work in more formal settings. I thought it might make sense to start with Jamel.
Sure, I'll jump right in. I want to say what's up to everybody here in the studio and everybody here at Urban Arts Partnership. James Miles to my left. We got Lauren is also here from our program EASE, Everyday Arts and Special Education. And to everybody who's connected on the chat and on the line. This is a very important, very timely conversation, especially when we're talking about the values of learning in an informal setting. I mean, we work mainly at this organization, at Urban Arts Partnership, work exclusively with Title I schools. These are schools that are consistently the most underfunded, and neighborhoods that are the most under-resourced, and serving children that are, in a manner of speaking, and all, in a real sense of speaking, that are under attack. And in this population, we see, especially as criminalization really affects them, you see them over and over that they're told that their culture is removed from the classroom and that it's seen as a distraction at best, and at worst, as something that is actually detrimental to their development. And with Fresh Prep, we take the approach that hip-hop pedagogy and culturally responsive pedagogy that treats youth culture as a culture, that treats their own culture as a culture, and values, we think about all of the experiences that they have, and that they don't actually enter the room as empty vessels that a teacher then has to dump knowledge into. But what it actually is these students are filled with experience. Think about how much they learn in informal settings outside from their homes. Think about how they, in one instance, you have teachers who continuously lambaste this population for being illiterate or not being able to formulate sentences. If they spend their entire days texting and talking with one another, they spend, you get told how these children can't read, but then over a weekend or in hours, they're able to memorize pages and pages and pages of lyrics. These students are, functioning in hyperliteracies and multiple literacies. And it's about, the approach of hip-hop pedagogy is about taking that, the learning from an informal setting, and actually applying that inside a school, during the school day, transforming your classroom into a concert, and all the things that you learn in that are both actual content, but then there's a lot of social and emotional development that actually happens with this as well. But it's to actually bring that approach into the classroom. And just a little bit about our program. The way that we do that is through test prep with the Regents exams in New York City. So we pair up a classroom teacher with a fresh prep teaching artist or master of curriculum, an MC, who joins their class and then plans with that teacher to be able to plot out 40 sessions of hip-hop pedagogy, arts integrated curriculum for test prep. And we found, and gotten spectacular results with this type of approach. Just this summer at Metropolitan Diploma Plus High School, which is a transfer school in Brownsville, we were able to get over 90% of the students there in the summer program, over 90% of the students there who had previously failed the exam to pass the exam. And so there's really a lot of value in, as I'm sure the other guests will speak to, about, leveraging all the ways and the forms that students learn in informal settings and actually bringing that into the classroom. And that's a real kind of pillar of hip-hop pedagogy as a pedagogical approach.
Fantastic. Why don't we just jump over to Mara, and then we'll come back to James, and then Aisha will jump in too. Mara.
Word, thank you. And I also want to say what's up to everybody out there and everybody on the call. And yeah, thank you so much for all of your thoughts so far. Yeah, I definitely hear you, and appreciate the emphasis on how hip hop is used and often used as kind of a world that can liberate us and bring us to better places. And really, I think in the tradition of just like Paulo Freire, liberatory pedagogy, because as we think about hip hop, as we think about education, as we think about the arts, in essence, all of those things I think are about liberation and kind of bringing us to better spaces. And really quick, I come to this world from as a teenager who was in the youth spoken word and hip hop communities in Wisconsin in the Midwest of Brave New Voices and youth spoken word, and kind of have been of this generation that has been supported maybe of the start of seeing this hip hop pedagogy or hip hop being used inside schools in spaces where we can maybe begin to see what we term maybe as formal education. As a place that can also hold these spaces of liberation and also be, somewhat informal and incorporate maybe some of these practices as well. So, I mean, I think for me, I've had, varying experiences with hip-hop pedagogy, and also just really do see the power of how, in a lot of ways, sometimes in our society too, when we think about hip-hop, it's easy to kind of like frame it as a small sense or something like you mentioned as something that can almost be detrimental to our society. But in my experience, and also in, my experiences and also the experiences of many, we can see hip-hop beginning to be this place that also does allow for us to engage with all of the parts of ourselves, that might restrict or like limit us in some ways, but also like find the freedom within these some ways. So, and particularly, I'll just mention too, I think in my experiences as an educator, and I work a lot with different teachers or teacher-educator prep programs, is that we see a lot of these multiracial communities and informal education settings. Often we are unable to have these spaces or encouraged to have conversations and dialogues around just kind of the social structures that have kind of pervaded our society and educational institutions for many, many years. And in this world, so and when you include hip hop in my experience of using hip hop in formal educational settings, it has often been the only space or one of the few spaces where we're encouraged to engage in the dialogue around what are the issues around race, class, and economic structures that we engage in every single day on many different levels. And that has proven for me, and definitely in my experience and many others, that is the spaces that have been most transformative when we talk about learning environments. So, and yeah, and also I'll just mention too, I've worked with the Hip Hop Education Center, which is run by my Martha Diaz here. So also, it might seem that right now the hip hop ed world is also just existing as many teaching artists in different spaces, and they're kind of doing this on their own. But there is a really huge movement right now that's beginning to organize itself. Always has been organizing itself and kind of putting ourselves. That's why I'm grateful for this conversation and being in these spaces where we can kind of cross this whatever line there might exist between the institutions, and this art form of hip hop. And I'm grateful to a lot of the spaces, especially the arts and education space at Harvard, and even just these spaces here now where we see academics or people who grew up with hip hop begin to kind of lead us in these spaces of supporting these kind of conversations that may not have aligned with traditional values or traditional educational systems in the past. So just wanted to say that.
Cool. Hello everyone, welcome. James Miles, fresh professor. So when I think of hip hop education, it's basically the essence of Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. You have 5 elements of hip hop. You have dance, you have MC, you have DJing, you have knowledge, and then you have graffiti or visual arts. So that's basically the way children learn, and I think hip-hop is an embodiment of that. And the most important aspect of that is the knowledge aspect, which is the knowledge of self. There's been studies done about students moving and dancing and listening to music, especially young girls, and dancing to music has improved their self-confidence by 100%. And the efficacy of the hip-hop music is just that. Also, when I think about hip-hop language, the MCs, the word allocation of some MCs, you think of Raekwon the Chef, right? You think of people like of Atmosphere. The way they use language, it's amazing, one. And also, it affects the development of young people. Students are saying, people say, studies have been shown that children learn through language acquisition, right? The number of words the parents use in the house determines how much they'll make in life. Well, hip-hop has so many different types of languages. You have Solar from Senegal. You have some other MCs from all over the world that use different languages. So the fact that students are able to listen to hip-hop at home and in informal settings and in schools just adds to the development as a human being. In London, they're looking at how hip-hop can help mentally depressed and psychologically disturbed individuals because of the nature of the lyrics that are being spoken, like Eminem talking about depression and about suicide, having people use their own language, use their own lyrics to talk about their own depression and things that are happening in their community.
Well, it looks like we lost Steve. Oh, and he's back. But I'm going to jump in and just say hi to everyone, the whole world, nation, virtual, live, and in living color. Yes, deuces to all. It's such an honor to be here. Currently in the AIE cohort at Harvard's Ed School. And it was very intriguing, and it kind of made a wrinkle in my brain, kind of do a backspin, thinking of informal and formal learning and thinking where hip-hop is in that. I think so many students that I've come into contact with never expect to see hip-hop brought into their classrooms, but it is naturally kind of like nobody in any of the K through 12 settings anyway has been alive without hip-hop existing, right? So it's always around, and I think it's almost necessary for educators to be very cognizant of this thing, this live, dynamic, breathing thing that is around that we're calling hip-hop, and how it's impacting not just Black and brown kids, but it's impacting everyone. So how are we going to harness that and acknowledge that and validate that hip-hop is real, and it should not always be treated as an aside? And I'm so grateful just to be a part of this conversation and be a part of a movement, as Maura was pointing out, that's happening, and just validating that hip-hop is real and it's a real powerful tool to educators and in the realm of education in any setting. And I definitely have had experiences in the K through 12 setting, but have had even more transformative ones in higher education. And I would love to pick up a conversation with you all going forward this afternoon if we get a chance to, about what hip-hop education looks like, should look like, shouldn't look like maybe, in higher ed, where young minds are at this very interesting point where they're going, I'm an adult now what do I think? Now how do I want to learn? And how do I think hip-hop can be in my learning environment? So I'm just so happy to be in this space and possibly get into that topic as well as any others. So yeah, let's go. There you go.
Thank you. I think I was disconnected for a bit, so I missed some of. James, did you speak? Yeah, I totally missed it.
That's okay.
Let me just. Totally brilliant. Let me just put this out. I would love to hear, whether it's from your own growth and development in your arts practice, your hip-hop practice, or what you've observed with others, but any specific examples of the ways in which young people have helped each other, or older folks have helped young people, specifically how to get better, push themselves, go further, and what that's looked like. And then we can just step back and say, you know, is that happening in our formal classrooms, and how could that?
There's an artist that's out of Chicago, which is where I'm from, rather young. His name's Vic Mensa. He was in special ed class with my brother, who was teaching at elementary school there. And he was having a lot of trouble in school, couldn't focus, didn't do well. But he did write rhymes. And my brother, who was also a hip-hop educator like myself, was like, yo, maybe you should, try that out. And the kid was like, I don't know, man, really? And my brother's like, yeah, try it. I mean, you got skills. So he tried it out, got better and better, and now he's touring the world as Vic Mensa. He's with Chance the Rapper, who's also out of Chicago. He does shows with up-and-coming MCs, Chief Keef, probably Chance the Rapper, yes, but Childish Gambino, Childish Gambino, who is, he wrote on 30 Rock, he's on Community, so he's an up-and-coming rapper. So, like, hip-hop changed that young man's life for the better. So that's one example.
Yeah, to dovetail off of that, I mean, I think that's an awesome example. I'll bring two that kind of specifically come to mind. One, I kind of began this work in a sense of working as, I received a Fulbright in 2008 to study hip-hop in Beijing. And I did a research project on multimedia ethnography about hip-hop in Beijing. And I began that study, and had studied Chinese language for, through high school, through college for a long time, and had always learned this in a very formal setting. I'd always learned it, with the book, reading back and forth, practicing characters. It's a very regimented and systematic language. And after kind of 7 years of that approach, I had trouble ordering in restaurants. Then, while I'm out on the Fulbright, I meet a good friend of mine who's actually from Dominica. His name is, he goes by Shaolin. This is a kid who hadn't studied a word of Chinese before he arrived. Landed in Beijing, and the year that I'm doing my Fulbright, we're sleeping on the same couches together, going to the same shows, hanging out with the same crew. And in a year, he was fluent in Mandarin. And this came from hanging out, freestyling, going to barbecues together, and it was really in this kind of that kind of social context that he was able to master the language, like immediately. And I learned a lot from him in that kind of an approach, and actually how to actually become fluent in language and secondary language acquisition, and that, you know, kind of all my years in a formal setting had actually stunted my growth with the language in a way that that learning outside of that, and also, you know, this was a hip hop project. It was a very, you know, you're learning this, you know, learning the language and learning the culture in a very, both in a very responsive way. That was able to really to augment my practice, and so you know, to relate that and the anecdote that James shared about Vic Mensa, with the work that we do with Fresh Prep with kind of routinely failing students, we find that even if students aren't able to pass the exam, I mean, these are students who have taken this exam 4 and 5 and 6 times. They need to be able to pass a global or U.S. history exam, global and U.S. history exam to graduate high school, and these are students who have routinely failed, you know, a number of times. And even if they aren't able to pass it after, you know, having, you know, a 1 block of programming with Fresh Prep, they have a renewed attitude towards the test and towards education fundamentally. You know, they're actually able to kind of unlock, you know, we've had students who realize, like, oh, I didn't think I could learn this way, or I didn't think I could learn, you know, but then find out actually new ways and find out ways that they have already been teaching themselves.
Can I add to that quickly? So growing up, I had a severe speech impediment and stutter, and so in the 80s, hip hop was just blooming, and my dad played hip hop all day. He loved NWA. Even before that, Run DMC. Before that, Marley Marl. So I listened to that, and I would rap along with the songs. And doing that actually helped improve my speech and improve my confidence in school. In fact, so much so that I was like, I'm gonna become an actor. And then I learned about other actors that also suffered from speech impediments and stutters that, you know, practiced with music, and that helped build their confidence and build their skills in public speaking. So that's just a personal story about myself.
Mara or Aisha, do you want to jump in, either of you?
Sure, I'll jump in really quickly. One of the residencies that I worked with in Florida at the Kravis Center for Performing Arts brings in elementary, middle school, high school students for 2 weeks. And I was doing a hip-hop dance class and just really loved my students, had a great experience, didn't think much was happening. And then one of the parents came to me and said, "How did you do that?" And I was like, "What?" She said, "My son has horrible, like, attention disorders that have been diagnosed, and we can't get him to focus on anything. We didn't know that he liked to do anything, let alone be." He was actually one of my shining students, and I don't know why that particular dance form appealed to him, but I think it was part of just the raw self-expression ability, just that I wasn't teaching, well, you have to do it this way. If you don't get it done in this amount of time, I just let the class kind of explore, and acknowledging that a lot of hip-hop movement is based on improvisation, is based on self-challenge, is based on checking in with the community and sharing, and that way beyond my intentional design was very empowering for him, just to even be alive as a person and not just as another student to check off in the classroom.
Mara, do you want to jump in?
For sure. I'll just say quickly, I mean, I think I've had similar experiences too, just in my own growing in developing as an artist and poet, and what that means outside of like the more formal poetry environments. But also I'll say maybe one of my most transformative, I think, learning environments also was like as I became a hip hop educator and a spoken word kind of educator in these higher ed settings. Actually at the University of Minnesota, I was able and kind of blessed to be able to take a couple different hip hop courses. And through there, so I guess in my experience growing in the Midwest and just in kind of multiracial environments, I often had the privilege of being able to engage in the hip-hop art forms, or art forms that maybe weren't coming from my communities, and not necessarily interrogate my own just like place in that space, place either as a white woman, as a woman, and the ways that maybe manifested for the better or worse. But my most transformative experiences were actually as part of the kind of spoken word club or spoken word organization at the University of Minnesota, and also in the courses with this kind of leadership of Zinzile Soke and other professors that I had, where they were the first times in my life, while I have been engaging with spoken word and hip hop, for my entire life. By the time I went to the University of Minnesota, in those classes was really the places where I was able to begin interrogating, what does it mean for me to be a woman in this world? What does it mean to be, you know, a white woman in this world or to engage in these art forms? Where are they coming from? What does it mean for me to honor all of that and do this all of this work kind of with integrity? And I think when it comes to being an educator and when I was working with students, a lot of that understanding hadn't really been formed or challenged by a lot of my even traditional, you know, teacher education programs. So it was definitely a space that was very unique and almost, you know, very rare in these higher ed spaces, where I was able to begin questioning that, and especially in the organization with my friends and people that would just say, hey, like, oh, let's check our, you know, where does that come from, whatever I was saying or whatever organizing we were doing in around my practices and like professional practices when it comes to communicating with people and things like that. So I think just having that space of reflection and also in a space of just allowing us to honor like the whole complex selves that we are, that comes with, you know, good or bad, or not in the dichotomy, but in of all sides of our being. So those were my most transformative spaces, and just kind of add to what you all have mentioned. So, but thank you all for that too.
You know, one of the things that's really striking me listening to all of you is how much is going on when young people are engaged, whether it's in hip-hop dance or in spoken word, graphic art, whatever, graffiti, that people are in engaging in that work. People are working on language. They're working on the relationship of movement to sound. I mean, they're working on issues of identity that Mara was just talking about, negotiating all kinds of relationships, and all in super fast time. I mean, this is all happening with a lot of intensity. All of those are things that, I don't know, I guess one question is, can that happen in formal settings? Because a lot of times, that just like everything, all of those qualities, passion, attention, focus, intensity, complexity, gets bled out of the classroom. And that seems to me like that's not that interesting, not that much fun. So, what do you think? Maybe this is the last comments that we have time for. Just some quick takes on that. Can you do it in a classroom? Can you bring that life and energy into the classroom?
Steve, I think that is the question. That is the question that, you know, and the question that like Fresh Prep is actually taking an approach on and saying, like, yeah, you can do it, but you actually have to have really rigorous structures in place. And it's so, you know, I'm so glad that you brought in the question of engagement, because so much of it is relying on engagement. If students are not engaged, they're not learning. You know, and the examples and stories that we all shared about our personal development and the programs that we work in, you know, engagement is key. You know, the dance student that Aisha was talking about is like the student, you know, without a dance form or without a style that actually engaged them and addressed them and related to that student, he was not learning. He was not, you know, this is a student who had ADD, you know, in the other class. And so you can do this, but it actually takes, you know, especially if you're working in the day, it's very reliant on a co-teaching partnership. If you're working with a teaching artist and a classroom teacher, and that kind of a setting, and it really takes structure, and you have to remove the teacher from the bottleneck of the class and create facilities and opportunities for students to navigate their own learning. But it takes a lot of environmental design and a lot of intent.
Yeah. I teach at NYU in the teacher education program, and part of my class, we do a freestyle called the Beastie Boys, where we go around and say a line, and the end of each line has to rhyme in the circle. And the first time I introduce it, the students are always like, oh, what? We have to rap? By the end of that semester, it's always like, yo, that made me a better teacher because I learned to improvise. I learned to think on my feet and go with the flow and just go with what the students are going. So I think that type of engagement, the teacher does that, the students are involved. The more excited the teacher is, the more excited the students are.
Word.
Mara, thought?
Word. Yeah, I'll just say definitely I agree with all you're saying. And yes, I think there is a crew of people, of educators and of young people who are kind of bringing this fun or hip hop and better experiences into the learning environments than maybe traditionally have been. So, or maybe they always have been, but just in different ways. So I definitely think so. And I think, many of us maybe are examples of that, and the educators that are supporting that. So I appreciate all of the work you all are doing.
Sorry, your mic. Mic check, 1 2 1 2. We can't hear you, Steve. What are you gonna do? Oh, turn the mic on. Turn the mic on. No. Yeah, I feel like I'm surrounded by the choir and the preachers, and we all get it. And I hope that more formal teacher preparation will embrace the pedagogy that is inherent to hip hop, because it does really center on community and engagement. So, yeah.
So I guess one thing that I want to say before we close out, and Mara's going to lead us in a little cipher, but to me, it's just a huge question how we take this conversation, because I'm going to pick up on what Aisha was saying, that we're all on board here in a sense, but how do we build a conversation with other educators who might relate to hip hop culture but don't see it as part of daily life in schools? And I guess the one thing that I think is that we can often open up and advance a conversation with people based on concern for particular young people, not talking about abstracts, not making gigantic claims, just saying here's a young man or a young woman who's not thriving in school but is thriving on the street or in the context of his or her artistic work. And how do we make that connection so that that can happen in the school building during the school day, every day, at least once, but preferably 5 times a day? So we need, I think the burden on us is to figure out how to really open up and push those conversations so that we can change the daily life for young people in schools. Mara, can we hand it back to you?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Steve, for that last comment. And I think we can use that as inspiration. So what I would like to just quickly lead us here on this chat, and then also whoever's tuning in, to go through maybe what I like to call like a debrief cipher. So I know in many different like educational communities we debrief in many ways, but I'll ask us to think of one word, phrase, or sound that encompasses maybe what we've talked about in this past 20 minutes or what you've thought about throughout the day, or maybe that will encourage your future work to lend to something that the question that Steve just proposed for us. So let's think of one word, phrase, or sound. I'll give us about a quick minute to think about that, and then I'll ask us to participate in an activity that will help us kind of debrief and close this space before we move forward. So think about that word, phrase, or sound, and I'm going to ask us to begin a hip-hop cipher within this. So very quickly, many of you might know, but I encourage you to also study more. The hip-hop cipher comes with a long, maybe ancient tradition, often in a circle, and also just with everybody, most important elements, which maybe there are many important elements, but also that we contribute and we also receive. So the 2 important things I'll ask us to do during this moment is to listen and also contribute. So I'm going to ask us to say our word, phrase, or sound in a repeated time, in a repeated motion. So have us say the word, phrase, or sound. If you'd like to just give us a beat or a freestyle, you're welcome to do that as well. So I will kick us off in a minute, or maybe count down to 3, and I'll ask us to begin saying our word, phrase, or sound. Does anybody have any quick questions about that? We can just roll with it. I'll have you guys take your microphones off mute. Okay, word. And I'll start saying a word, and then when you feel comfortable, please add your word, phrase, or a sound. Word. 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 If you haven't added it, you can add it over mine.
Inspiration. Inspiration.
Word.
Inspiration.
Word.
Inspiration.
Word.
Inspiration.
Word.
Conversation.
Very
Conversation.
necessary.
And slowly we can take it out one at a time. Keep saying.
Una palabra. Una palabra.
Google Ball.
Okay, give it up for yourselves. Thank you for participating in that.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you, Maura, for leading us in that. That was great, and I hope people were tweeting their words using AIE CTC chat. And be sure to head over to AIEconversation.org to add your comments and continue the conversation. We will be back in the studio on November 14th at 3 p.m. to discuss the measure of quality in arts education, and we'll have some new guests joining us then. So thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.